the most high of you. Mom, you're a superwoman. You're Wonder Woman. Now, then comes the adolescent, that awful era, right? The psychologist calls it the wonder years, when our minds just go bonkers. When I was in my wonder years, I began to question, maybe, you know what, my mom doesn't really know it all. And she is hopelessly very, very old-fashioned. And then my 20s came. And because of our huge differences, I moved away. I moved out of the house very early. My greatest supporter in prayer, in my ministry. So as we celebrate Mother's Day today, I want to say from the bottom of my heart, Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers who are sitting in this room, who are going to be going out and be pampered. And this morning I asked Arjun, so what did you do for your mom? And he smiled at me and said, you know what? I made her breakfast, Pastor Ben. So all those of you guys who had this beautiful breakfast for your kids, I just want to say, you know what? Happy Mother's Day. Because you know what? I'm so glad that you guys are with us this morning. And you know what? Honestly, you have given so much. You have given so much, especially your wisely wisdom. I mean, you know what? Unlike fathers, mothers would never say things like, how on earth are you going to be able to see the TV sitting so far? Just leave the lights on all day, all night. Would never dare to say things like that. Now, maybe dad will, right? They are graceful wreath of your head and ornaments about your neck. Now, I want to ask you, what is the book of Proverbs about? What is the book of Proverbs about? It's about wisdom. Good. And today's wisdom teaches that do not forsake your mother's teachings. And I ask you this morning, what are some of the teachings that your moms taught you? I read I hope they will turn out to be just like you. And this is one of my favorite. This is one of my favorite that my mom used to say all the time. You know what? Dongbina is my Korean name. I brought you into this world, and I could take you out. That was the teaching of my mom. Now, on a serious note, didn't not my mom teach us things like be generous, son, be respectful, especially to your elders. You know what? Growing up, my parents, especially my mom, hated when other kids were so disrespectful, especially to elders. I lived in Korea during the 90s, and when I would go into a subway, there used to be a seat for the pregnant people and the elderly. In the 90s, did you know that even though the compartments or the subway was filled with people, nobody sat there? Nobody sat there. I remember first time, my strange experience. I was so tired, and I sat there, literally a grandfather with his cane, he bonked me on the head. And son, don't you see that sign? It's only for elderly and for the pregnant ladies. And I learned my good lesson. 2 years ago when I was in Korea, went to the subway, dude, everybody took the seat. And that seat that was designed for the elderly and for the pregnant people, there were a lot of young things or the things that our parents teach us. They're a bunch of naggings. And we tend to close our ears to their teachings. And I think that's the reason why the Bible commands us to honor our fathers and mothers. Exodus 20:21, right? And also the words of Paul in Ephesians chapter 6, it says, children, obey your parents. Especially what Focus on the Family teaches us, that the pendulum has swung from focusing upon children's behavior to focusing upon child's emotions. And I feel like we're too nunching or worrying about how our kids will react rather than take advantage of. They're also capable of simply following orders without question, without taking responsibility for their actions. So every children, listen, obedience isn't healthy. Psychology Today, September 2017 issue. when I read that, I said, this isn't right. Where do people come up with? When I was in Korea just 2 years ago, I saw an incident that I was really, really bugged. And my wife was just holding my hands. You know what? Please calm down, calm down. We were just sitting in a restaurant, and this kid was just going around tables, being bothersome. He was yelling, screaming. He even went on top of the table, kicked the spoon and the chopstick, one of those little places where you hold it. He knocked it off the table. And you know what? Honestly, the parents didn't do anything. And there was an older gentleman. He said, you know what? Who's your parents? And they approached the parents, and the parents, especially the mom, and says, what's wrong with you? Why are you reprimanding my child? Leave the responsibility. So there was an argument that arose. And when I saw that, I was like, whoa, this is not right. But this is the culture that we have evolved to. But with the wise wisdom of our mothers, we could really, really navigate through life with respect and with sense of moral judgment, and with, more importantly, mothers who teach their children to love God, to fear God. Because look what it says. You know what? Listen to your father's instructions. Listen to your mother's instructions, because they teach us what? To fear God. And I feel like to live in such a way that is constantly pointing our children to the Lord, to live a way that they will always sense, to know that yes, you are loved by, deserves a mother who has these kind of wisdoms to play a larger role in rearing our children in our society today. Did you guys know that in the Old Testament there were only 2 basic roles of a spiritual community? If you read through the whole entire Old Testament, there's only 2 basic roles of a spiritual community: the role of a priest and the role of a prophet. The priest's job was to represent the people before God, and the role of a prophet was to represent God to the people. So the priest would make sacrifices, make prayers on the behalf of the people to God, and prophets was there to voice the concern of God and spoke for God. And so God revealed His will through the Old Testament, through the throats of the prophets and the prophetess in the Old Testament. But in fact, when we come to the New Testament, that this was so vital to God in the book of Hebrews, the writer begins by saying, God, who at the various times, in a various ways, spoke to our people. Someone once said that translation of the Bible is the most accurate. By the way, do you guys know that this is still an argument today? People are still arguing which translation is the greatest. Anyways, and this group of scholars were together, and the oldest guy in the group said, it's got to be the New King James Version, the King James Version. Because if it was good enough for Paul, then it's good enough for me. Then a younger scholar said, no, I like the New Living Translation because it is so fresh, it is so contemporary. I mean, the languages and the dynamics of the words are so alive. But most of all, I think the New Living Translation captures the spirit of the original text. Now, the third guy listening to the argument is, no, I like the ESV, the English Standard Version. I think it's a good combination between the old and the new. It strikes the balance. The fourth guy came, and all the scholars, they all laughed at him. What? You got to be out of your mother's translation? What kind of a translation is that? And the guy spoke up and said, you know what? I like my mother's translations the best. Dish out unto your children is the love for God. No one is poor who has a godly mother. When I came across this statement, no one is poor. No one is poor who has a godly mother. And I really began to realize, why is that? Why always pray, our life is like a roller coaster, is bond. When everything is going wrong, how do you respond in the midst of God? Rejoice in the Lord always, to pray without ceasing, giving thanks in all circumstances, because they have demonstrated over and over again the will of God moving through that family. You know what? To hear them, to the voice of God, you know what? I want you to walk wisely, walk boldly, walk humbly before God. And you yourself needs to demonstrate these kind of attributes in order to teach your children how to walk righteously in your family. And you guys want to know the examples. And the list goes on and on and on and on. You know what? Actually, it's in Psalms chapter 78, verse 1 through 7. Just listen very carefully. Psalm 78, verse 1 through 7. I will open my mouth with a parable. I would utter these hidden things to you, things from the old, things we have heard and known, things from our ancestors who have taught us. We will not hide them from their descendants. We will teach the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, His power and the words and the wonders that God has shown, His decreed stature for Jacob, and established the laws of Israel, which He commanded our ancestors to teach their children, so to the next generation they would know them, even the children yet to be born, and they in turn would tell their children. Then they would put who don't believe in the Ten Commandments. Mentoring wisdom to your children. Teach them to fear the Lord. Teach them to fear the Lord. Be in reverence of the Lord. And this is the beginning of what? Of knowledge. Let me close with your story that it's been tucked away in my journal for a long time. And this has touched me a long time ago, and I hope it touched you today as we celebrate Mother's Day. A young mother set her foot on the path of life. And she, in the beginning, as a young mother, she asked, is life long? And her guide said, yes. And the way is too hard. And you will be old before you reach the end. But the end will be better than the beginning. But the young mother was very happy. She would not believe that anything could be better than these years. So she played with her children, gathered the flowers for them along the way, and bathed them with the clear streams, taught my children the word courage. And then the morning came. There was a hill ahead, and the children climbed up and grew weary. And the mother was weary also. But all the time she said to her children, little patience, children. We will be there soon. So the children climbed. And when they reached the top, they said, we could not have done it without you, mother. And then the children grouped and stumbled. And the mother said, look up, lift your eyes to the light, lift your eyes to the sky. And the children looked and saw above the clouds the everlasting glory, and guided them through.